171 in the name of Deputy Paul Murphy.
I also want to raise the case of Ibrahim Hawala, an Irish citizen who is a prisoner of conscience, according to Amnesty International. The case is extremely urgent. I mean, we're 5 days now from the next hearing date. It's obviously accurate that the decision to release or not release Ibrahim will be made by the Egyptian authorities. But the idea that Egyptian law applies, I mean, there is no rule of law in reality in Egypt, and there is no justice available to Ibrahim. And so does the Minister agree that the maximum pressure has to be applied, including directly by the Taoiseach, on the Egyptian authorities?
I wish to reassure Deputy Murphy that my objectives in the case are both appropriate and clear. Firstly, to see the release of the individual by the authorities in Cairo so that he can return home to resume his studies in Dublin and to be with his family. And secondly, to provide support for his welfare while he remains detained. This approach, the approach that I continuously take on an almost daily basis, is in furtherance of these objectives. And it's important to note yet again, and forgive me, if I repeat it, but the role of the Irish Government, where citizens are detained abroad, irrespective of any views regarding the fairness of the trial, regarding the circumstances, political or otherwise, in the jurisdiction where the person might be detained, the reality is that where an Irish citizen is charged with an offence or offences under the law of a foreign country, it's the foreign law that is applicable, and it's the relevant foreign court which decides on these matters, and all matters such as bail, such as evidence, and such as continued detention or release. That notwithstanding, I believe there are circumstances associated with this case that warrant a return home of the individual, and I wish to assure the House of my continued interest in that regard. It is a matter solely for the authorities in Cairo. Deputy Murphy suggests that there are a number of days yet before the trial. That's correct. The return date is towards the end of this week. But in line with our clear objectives in the case, our approach is consistently under review. I'm keeping the Taoiseach fully briefed, and it may be at a certain stage that it would be beneficial to the citizen for the Taoiseach to become involved. I haven't ruled that out as a possibility, but the hearing dates, the return dates, the date upon which evidence is tendered is entirely and solely and exclusively a matter for the courts in Egypt.
Thank you, Minister. Deputy Paul Murphy.
I would urge the Minister and the Government to now go with the option of the Taoiseach intervening. I mean, in 5 days' time, Ibrahim could be sentenced to death. Yesterday, 22 people were sentenced to death for participation in a protest. There is no chance of him receiving justice in what is a mass trial. I mean, again, you recognise the reality that, yes, the Egyptian authorities will decide, but also the nature of those authorities. You have a dictatorship in Egypt, a counter-revolutionary dictatorship that is drowning a revolution in blood. That's what's happening through an act of mass trials and then executions. And there's an Irish citizen who is caught up in that. Nobody else should be caught up in it either, any of those peaceful protesters. But the government has to do everything it can, and surely that does include the Taoiseach intervening. I don't see how the Taoiseach intervening could have a negative impact in terms of Ibrahim's prospects.
Thank you, Deputy. Tara.
The next hearing is scheduled for the 26th of April, which is dated this week. It would be most unhelpful for me, or indeed for anybody else, to speculate as to what might happen on that occasion. But I wish to assure the House and assure Deputy Murphy that Irish Embassy officials will be in attendance, as indeed they have been at every hearing of his trial, in order to monitor, to experience and to report on the developments of the day. At this stage before the courts, there is a specific application for the release of the individual on bail. That is currently being considered by the judge. Any inappropriate escalation of political intervention, however well-intentioned that might be, could be counterproductive to our objective in this case, and could be counterproductive to the best interests and welfare of the citizen involved. So we are keeping matters under review, and I would be happy to keep the individual deputy fully informed.
Thank you, Minister.
In the light of developments.
Thank you, Minister. Deputy Murphy.
Again, I accept and I welcome the fact that people from the embassy will be in attendance and monitoring, and I accept the intentions of the government in this are not to harm Ibrahim in any way. But at this stage, I think what's needed is the highest possible level of political intervention. And yes, are there differences in other cases? Of course there are, but was a factor high-level political intervention in terms of the cases of the Australian citizen, Peter Grest, and in terms of the Canadian citizen, Mohammed Sami.
Thank you, Deputy.
In the last couple of days, as Deputy Crowe referred to, you had a situation where the family didn't know what prison he was in. They went to another prison, he wasn't there. They went back to that prison, he had been moved and had showed signs, according to his family, of physical abuse.
Thank you,
so we need the maximum possible intervention here to pressurise the authorities.
Minister, final reply.
Could I again express concern at some inaccurate reporting regarding the circumstances of the individual? There have been allegations of torture, which were taken very seriously and investigated by my department and by myself. There was a suggestion in the form of a report that he was missing in prison. Could I say that didn't transpire to be the case? And while the individual remains in detention, a key objective for me is that we can do what we can to protect his welfare, his well-being, and to ensure that the prison conditions for him are as good as under the circumstances can be. Following an intervention by our ambassador, the individual involved is no longer sharing a cell with convicted criminals. He is now accommodated with other remand detainees, which is not a negative development. I'm aware that he's in a different area of the prison from most of his co-accused. In addition to regular consular visits, our embassy in Cairo is in ongoing contact with the prison authorities and the relevant ministries to ensure that the citizens' conditions are as good as possible. They have raised, and we will continue to raise, any issues through all appropriate channels.
Question 172.